the Mining Legislation Reform Institute. The way I came into this position was I've known Anto for a number of years through various circles and various networks, and he came by Sydney about 12 months ago, and we got into a conversation about Armenia, we got into a conversation about policy and advocacy, as we always do. And then about 6 months later, I was in Armenia working at the Mining Legislation Reform Institute. My wife and I and my 2-year-old son have now moved to Armenia, and we're delighted to be able to work on this project. I'm going to speak very briefly today, but I am going to speak about a few things. First thing I'm going to talk about is just give you a snapshot of what the mining sector in Armenia looks like. And then I'm going to suggest to you what the problems are, the systemic and the glaring problems in the mining sector. And then I want to tell you what the MLRI is actually doing to try and fix it. This is mining in Armenia in a snapshot. These are 2016 performance results, economic results for the mining sector. You see that mining is undertaken in 3 main regions. So up top at Lori, in Kerarkunik in the centre, and at Sunik down south. Now from 2016, because at the time the Tel mine was still in operation up north, Sunik actually represented 65% of mining revenue. It's always been concentrated in that area. Right now, because the Tel mine is actually stopped, the Sunik region actually accounts for about 95% of mining revenue. So a lot of concentration of energy is down south. You're looking at about 3% of Armenia's state revenue comes from the mining sector. So look, it's not huge, but at the same time, no one wants a 3% contraction in the economy by closing all the mines all at once. So that's just about where the impact sits at the moment. This is the open cut mine at Zankezur in Kajaran. It is actually the largest mine in Armenia. Serge just commented that he doesn't like open cut mines, and certainly I appreciate his suggestion or opinions in relation to that. But otherwise, this looks like a pretty standard mine. It's actually a pretty useful one because it provides about 90% of the state revenue generated from mining comes from this one mine. So the taxes come from this one mine. Now, what's unique about this one mine? It's got about 100 years worth of reserves. So if you think about the 2.7% of the state economy today and 100 years of reserves, mining's probably going to stick around in Armenia for a while, right? So it's going to be part of our future, that we know. What we need to now think about is, at what cost do we let these operations continue? So here's an image of mine waste, so tailings waste, going directly into the Armenian river system. This is a photo that I've taken. It's part of a socio-scope project. And effectively you're seeing how untreated water is entering Armenian river systems. I mean, Armenians are incredibly good at talking about Arax River, and incredibly good about talking about rivers that are no longer in the Armenian state, like Euphrates and Tigris. But are we looking after them? And that's the question we've got to answer. And now what happens when you pollute the water incredibly? I mean, surprise, surprise, the cows drift over and drink from, this is from a tailings pond in southern Armenia. So you're seeing already the heavy metals from that waste entering into the river system and then entering into the food chain. If it's entering into the food chain, you think about the impact that that's having on the local communities. So we talk about employment, and I think that that's pretty useful in regional areas in Armenia, but at the same time, at what cost? Here, unfortunately, there's a public education exercise that's required. This is a photo taken by AUA staff at American University of Armenia, where some villagers have actually taken some mine waste. They've put it over their own soil to flatten it out. They've started to plant crops in it, so it's coming through the plants, but at the same time the children in the area are actually playing on that same area. So there's a serious gap, not only in the way the mining companies are actually operating, but in how the people need to be able to behave and react to this same thing. Next slide. One thing sometimes it gets overlooked is the treatment of the workers and how they're actually operating. Now, I don't want to place entire blame on mining companies, but at the same time, you know, there's a culture of not paying too much attention to safety. And here you see unprotected workers. I mean, think about the exposure that they see right here, and then go home and kiss their children and hug their families and then eat with those same hands. So we really need to take a look at, if we are going to mine, and there seems to be a pretty good reason or justification to continue mining in Armenia, there's 100 years worth of reserves, It's a very profitable mine, it should work for us. We really need to think about how we can fix these things as well. Look at the licensing rules, they're actually quite weak. So there's no proper cost-benefit analysis that's undertaken when you're about to commence work on a mine. So you already start off on the wrong footing. The next picture that you need to take a look at is the environmental impact assessment. And yeah, they're done, environmental impact assessments are done. But in many, many instances, they actually haven't consulted with the communities that are impacted. So the environmental impact assessment is undertaken, but the affected communities themselves aren't considered as part of the impacted communities. We need to take a look at this and we need to start to think about how we fix it. I've written undocumented health impacts. The reality is, under laws in Armenia, you're actually required to give some attention to the health impacts. The problem therein is that there aren't sufficient guidelines to assist the mining companies to actually write the health impact. So in most cases, they're not actually even completed, and mining licenses are granted without this even being part of a submission. Thinking about Armenia as an area that has a lot of mountains and in the seismic zone, if you obviously have dam constructions that are improper, think about the potential that the damage that overflow can do. Think about the damage that the collapse of a mine wall can do to the region. I mean, we saw what happens in Brazil, and Brazil is substantially larger than Armenia. For an area of 30,000 square kilometres, I say square kilometres because I'm Australian, think about the impact that that might have. And then we look at things like the deplorable waste management. You saw the photos earlier, so I'm not going to detail that. At the start of the commencement of a mine, there needs to be a closure plan, and often they're put together, but they're quite weak. And then the money that's set aside, unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword. The companies really haven't put in enough to actually rehabilitate the land, and then any money that's been put forward, unfortunately, is being squandered by previous governments. So they're in a situation now where they've got legacy mines, mines that have closed, and the land hasn't been rehabilitated. We really need to look at that as an additional I guess, aspect of mining and management into the future that often goes unsaid. And then governance, monitoring, assessment of all of these mines. You know, it's really, really important to make sure that when the laws are in place, the companies are actually complying with those laws, that there's still something in it for the people of Armenia if they do that. So what is the MLRI doing about this? Well, over the last couple of years, we've done some incredible research. We've got experts from Armenia and overseas to help us with mine waste management, with land rehabilitation. We've even had a look at the tax regime. We've looked at papers on that, and effectively we've discovered whether the mining companies are actually paying enough tax. Are they paying their bit? Are they doing what's required of them? Or as yet, is this an area that still requires a little bit more economic review for Armenia? Since then, we've also been in a situation where we've gone and spoken with the local community. So we've had people from Sunik and Kerarkunik and Lori come to our forums and roundtable discussions. We've had activists, we've had academics from the American University of Armenia, we've had academics from the Yerevan State University. They've all come, they've all participated, they've all contributed to helping shape and I guess develop an aggregate of views of what needs to be done in the mining sector. Here's a photo from actually one of our workshops. We're really doing things in the country that unfortunately haven't yet been done. And it's a very useful exercise because we believe that the people should be determining their own destiny. This allows them to voice their concerns and starts them off on the right track. So what's next for us? Our key projects, right? We're right at the stage now where we're ready to draft legislation. The first pieces of work that we're looking at is we want to review the mining licensing permit laws. It shouldn't be that easy to get a mining license. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to make sure it's tighter. We're going to make sure that the government has better opportunities not only to govern the situation but also to revoke a mining license if a company hasn't been playing by the rules or living up to the promises that they've said. We're taking a look at that right now. We're also looking at a mining inspection checklist. We're looking at mining inspection laws and making sure that we're empowering the inspectors to be able to do their job. They need to be able to get in there, to inspect the mines, to check the water quality, and right now the system is structured to make them fail. We're helping them out by reviewing that legislation. We're also doing a little bit more research. This is really where the government is actually quite interested. They're interested in the economic impact. We're looking at issues like tax avoidance, and we're also looking into what the economic impact of starting a mine is under the current system. So we have short-term economic gain, but in the long term, if we're going to have to rehabilitate that land, if we're going to have to spend money on making sure that the water quality is improved again, I mean, how much money are we spending, and does it really stack up to start mining in the first place? That's what we really need to take a look at, and that's what we're researching right now. We'll do the research, and then we'll start the legislative reform in that space as well. And one more thing I wanted to highlight here is advocacy. Effectively, our job is not only to draft the legislation and do the research, but to actually pitch it to government. We're in a unique situation. It's a new political playing field in Armenia. We have a government that for the first time is prepared to listen. This is a unique situation. I have no doubt that they have a lot of people to listen to, amongst which we are one, and many people who don't share the same opinions as us when it comes to mining. So effectively, our job is make sure we get in there, make sure we work with international experts, get the legislation done, put it to them, and build that stakeholder support to get that legislation through and get those changes into effect. That's where we stand right now. That's the precipice we're on. And effectively, we're looking for your support to make it happen. So thank you for your time, and thank you for being a kind audience.